The telegram arrived on a Tuesday morning in the autumn of 1878, and Violet Jameson read it 3 times before her hands started shaking so badly she had to set it down on the kitchen table of her small ranch house outside Carson City, Nevada. Her husband was dead. Captain Robert Jameson, veteran of the United States Army, had succumbed to complications from war injuries sustained during his service. The telegram was brief, cold, informative in the way government correspondents always managed to strip humanity from tragedy. Violet stood at that table for what felt like hours, staring at the words until they blurred together, until the reality of being a 24-year-old widow crashed over her like a wave of desert heat. Robert had been 41 when they married 2 years ago, a quiet man with kind eyes who had shown her nothing but respect and gentleness. He had retired from active service before their marriage, though his body bore the marks of his years in uniform. They had met when she was working at the general store in town, and he had courted her properly, seriously, promising her security and a good home. She had grown to care for him deeply, though theirs had not been a passionate love story. It had been steady, reliable, safe. Now he was gone, and Violet was left with a small ranch, 3 horses, a handful of cattle, and a growing sense of panic about how she would manage alone. The funeral was simple. Robert had few friends in Carson City, having only settled there after his retirement. Violet wore black and accepted condolences from neighbors she barely knew. The sky was impossibly blue that day, the kind of crystalline autumn blue that seemed cruel in its beauty. She wanted rain, wanted clouds, wanted the world to reflect the heaviness in her chest. After the burial, she rode back to the ranch and began sorting through Robert's papers. He had been meticulous about record keeping, and she found his discharge papers, his service records, documentation of every battle and campaign. She also found a letter he had written to her, but never sent, telling her about the pension he would be eligible for, explaining that if anything happened to him, she would be taken care of through the military. Violet held that letter and felt the first real hope since receiving the telegram. A widow's pension would mean survival. It would mean keeping the ranch, keeping food on the table, maintaining the life Robert had built for them. The next morning, she dressed in her most respectable outfit and rode into Carson City. The territorial government offices were housed in a stone building near the center of town, imposing and official. Violet tied her horse to the post outside and gathered her courage before walking through the heavy wooden doors. The clerk at the front desk was a thin man with wire-rimmed spectacles who looked at her with barely concealed impatience. "Help you, Mrs. Violet corrected gently. "Mrs. Robert Jameson. My husband recently passed. He was a captain in the United States Army, and I am here to apply for his widow's pension." The clerk's expression shifted to something between pity and dismissal. "You will need to speak with the territorial representative. Wait here." She waited for nearly an hour on a hard wooden bench, watching other people come and go about their business. Finally, she was called into an office where a portly man with elaborate sideburns sat behind a massive desk covered in papers. "Mrs. Jameson," he said without standing, "I am sorry for your loss. However, I must inform you that widows' pensions are not automatically granted. There is a process, an application that must be submitted to the War Department in Washington." "I understand," Violet said, sitting straighter in her chair. "I have brought all of my husband's service records. He served honorably for 18 years. The man barely glanced at the papers she placed on his desk. "Be that as it may, the decision ultimately rests with the Pension Bureau. They are quite strict about their requirements. You must prove not only your husband's service, but also your financial dependency on him and your current need. I can prove all of that, Violet said firmly. I have marriage records, property records, everything you might require. He finally looked at her directly, and something in his expression made her stomach tighten. Mrs. Jameson, I will submit your application, but I must warn you that the Bureau is notoriously slow and often denies claims, particularly for widows. The general opinion in Washington is that such pensions are a drain on federal resources, and that women often remarry quickly enough that the pension becomes unnecessary. Violet felt heat rise in her cheeks. My husband served his country for nearly 2 decades. He was wounded in service. Surely his sacrifice entitles his widow to some consideration. You may believe what you wish, the man said, already turning his attention back to other papers on his desk. I will submit the application. Good day, Mrs. Jameson. She left the office feeling dismissed and diminished, but she tried to hold on to hope. The application had been submitted. Now she simply had to wait. Weeks turned into months. Autumn gave way to the sharp cold of a Nevada winter. Violet managed the ranch as best she could, but without Robert's strength and experience, things began to fall apart. Fences needed mending. One of the horses went lame. The cattle wandered, and she spent exhausting days tracking them down. She sold what she could to buy supplies, stretching every dollar as far as it would go. In late January, a response finally came from the Pension Bureau. Violet opened the envelope with trembling hands, standing in the cold outside the post office. Application denied. Insufficient evidence of need. Recommendation that widow seek employment or remarriage. She read those words over and over, unable to process their finality. Insufficient evidence of need. As if struggling alone on a ranch through a brutal winter was not evidence enough. As if her entire life had not been upended by Robert's death, Violet rode back to the ranch in a daze. That night, she sat by the fire and let herself cry for the first time since the funeral. She cried for Robert, for the life she had lost, for the overwhelming weight of uncertainty pressing down on her. But when morning came, she dried her tears and made a decision. She would appeal. She would fight. Robert had fought for his country. She would fight for what was rightfully hers. She spent the next week preparing a detailed appeal, documenting every expense, every hardship, every piece of evidence she could gather. She wrote about Robert's service, his wounds, his honorable discharge. She explained her situation clearly and without self-pity, presenting facts and figures that should have been impossible to deny. When she submitted the appeal at the territorial office, the same clerk looked at her with weary recognition. Another application, Mrs. Jameson. An appeal, she corrected. The first decision was unjust. He took her papers without comment. Another month passed. Another denial arrived, this one even more curt than the first. The Bureau had reviewed the appeal and found no reason to overturn the original decision. Women were not entitled to Army pensions unless they could prove extraordinary circumstances. The matter was closed. Violet sat in her cold kitchen, holding that second denial, and felt something shift inside her. Grief gave way to anger. Hopelessness transformed into determination. If the government would not help her, she would find someone who would. She had heard stories about a lawyer in Carson City who took on difficult cases, who was not afraid to challenge authority. She had also heard he was expensive, likely far beyond her means, but she had nothing left to lose. The law office was above a saloon on the main street, accessed by a narrow staircase. Violet climbed those stairs on a cold February morning, her breath misting in the air, her resolve hardening with each step. The door had a simple sign painted on the glass. Yates Sullivan, attorney at law. She knocked, and a voice called for her to enter. The office was small but organized, lined with law books and smelling of leather and tobacco smoke. Behind a desk cluttered with papers sat a man who looked up as she entered, and Violet felt her breath catch despite herself. He was young, perhaps 26 or 27, with dark hair that fell slightly over his forehead and eyes so intensely blue they seemed almost unreal. He wore a vest over a white shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, and there was something about him that spoke of both intelligence and barely contained energy. He stood when he saw her, and she noticed he was tall and lean, built like someone who had spent time working with his hands before he turned to law books. "Can I help you, madam?" His voice was warm, with a slight drawl that suggested he had not been born in Nevada. "Are you Mr. Sullivan?" "Yates Sullivan, yes. Please, have a seat." He gestured to the chair across from his desk and waited until she sat before settling back into his own chair. "What brings you to my office today?" Violet took a breath, forcing herself to focus on why she was there rather than on the unexpected racing of her heart. "My name is Violet Jameson. My husband was a captain in the United States Army. He passed away last autumn, and I applied for his widow's pension. The Bureau has denied me twice, and I need help fighting their decision." Yates leaned forward, his expression immediately serious and attentive. "Tell me everything." She did. She explained Robert's service record, their marriage, his death, her applications and appeals, the cold dismissals from both the Territorial Office and the Federal Bureau. She showed him all the documents she had brought, spreading them across his desk. He examined each paper carefully, his brow furrowing as he read. When he finally looked up at her, there was something like anger in his eyes, but she sensed it was not directed at her. "This is absurd," he said flatly. "Your husband served honorably for 18 years. You have clear documentation of your marriage and his death. You own property that you are struggling to maintain alone. By any reasonable standard, you should qualify for a widow's pension." "The Bureau disagrees," Violet said quietly. "They say I have not proven sufficient need." "The Bureau is wrong." Yates stood and walked to his window, looking out at the street below. "I have seen cases like this before. The federal government has become increasingly stingy with military pensions, particularly for widows. There is a general in the Pension Bureau, a man named Henderson, who has made it his personal mission to deny as many claims as possible. He believes women should not receive government money, that it encourages dependency and moral weakness." Violet felt her jaw tighten. "That is outrageous." "It is," Yates agreed, turning back to face her. "It is also unfortunately common, but that does not mean we cannot fight it." He paused, and she saw something shift in his expression. "I should be honest with you, Mrs. Jameson. Taking on the federal government is expensive and time-consuming. My usual fee for such a case would be substantial, likely more than you can afford to pay." Her heart sank. She had known this would be the obstacle, but hearing it confirmed still hurt. "I understand. Thank you for your time, Mr. Sullivan." She started to gather her papers, but he held up a hand. "I did not say I would not take your case." Violet looked up at him, confused. "But you just said—" "I said my usual fee would be too expensive. I did not say I required that fee." He sat back down, fixing her with those intense blue eyes. "The truth is, Mrs. Jameson, I became a lawyer because I wanted to fight injustice. I spent 2 years working for a big firm in San Francisco, making money and defending people who did not need defending. I came to Carson City because I wanted to do something that mattered. Your case, this situation, it matters. So here is what I propose. I will take your case. If we win, you pay me a percentage of the pension back pay you are owed. If we lose, you owe me nothing." Violet stared at him, unable to believe what she was hearing. Why would you do that? Yates smiled, and it transformed his face from serious and intense to something warmer, more open. Because it is the right thing to do. Because your husband served this country and deserves better than to have his widow dismissed and ignored. Because I am tired of seeing powerful men abuse their positions to hurt people who cannot fight back. He extended his hand across the desk. Do we have an agreement? She took his hand, feeling the warmth and strength of his grip, and for the first time in months she felt genuine hope. We have an agreement. Over the following weeks, Violet came to Yates's office regularly as they built their case. He was meticulous and passionate, researching every relevant law and precedent, drafting letters and briefs with careful precision. He asked her endless questions about Robert's service, their marriage, her current situation, and he listened to every answer with complete attention. She found herself looking forward to those meetings more than she should. There was something compelling about watching Yates work, seeing his mind move through legal arguments with the same grace and confidence a skilled rider showed with a difficult horse. He had a way of making her feel heard, valued, as if her fight mattered not just as a legal case but as a personal crusade. Tell me about yourself, she said one afternoon when they were taking a break from paperwork. You mentioned San Francisco. Where are you from originally? Texas, Yates said, leaning back in his chair. Small town outside of Austin. My father was a rancher and I grew up expecting to follow in his footsteps. But during the war, when I was just a boy, I saw how legal arguments and paperwork could be just as powerful as guns and armies. Maybe more powerful because they changed things permanently. When I was old enough, I convinced my father to let me go east for schooling. Studied law in Philadelphia, worked in San Francisco, and then decided I wanted to go somewhere I could actually make a difference. Why Carson City? He grinned. Why not? It is growing, full of people who need good legal representation, and far enough from the old establishment that a young lawyer can build a reputation without being crushed by older, more connected firms. And how is that working for you? Better than expected, he said, his grin softening into something more sincere. Especially recently. There was something in the way he looked at her that made Violet's pulse quicken. She told herself she was being foolish, that he was simply being kind, that her loneliness was making her see things that were not there. But the feeling persisted, growing stronger each time they met. In early March, Yates finished preparing their formal legal challenge to the Pension Bureau's decision. He had built an exhaustive argument, citing federal law, military regulations, and precedents from similar cases. He had also uncovered information about General Henderson, the man responsible for so many denied claims, and his pattern of bias against women applicants. This is going to make some people in Washington very angry, Yates said as he sealed the documents for mailing. We are not just challenging your specific denial. We are challenging the entire system Henderson has built. Is that dangerous? Violet asked, worried. Legally, no. Politically, perhaps. But that is my problem to worry about, not yours. He smiled reassuringly. I am good at making powerful people angry in ways they cannot quite punish. The response came faster than expected. Within 3 weeks, Yates received a letter from the Pension Bureau, but instead of a simple denial, it was a summons. The Bureau wanted oral arguments presented in person in Washington, D.C. They were taking the case seriously, which meant they saw it as a threat. This is good, Yates said when he showed Violet the letter. This means we rattled them. If they thought they could simply dismiss us again, they would have. But they want to argue face to face, which means they are worried our case has merit. Does that mean I need to go to Washington? Violet asked, feeling overwhelmed by the prospect. It means I need to go to Washington. You can stay here, maintain the ranch, and I will represent you in person before the Bureau." He paused, studying her face. "Unless you want to come, it would be a long journey, expensive, and there is no guarantee it would help the case, but you have every right to be there." Violet considered this. The ranch needed her attention and the expense would be significant, but this was her fight, her husband's legacy, her future. "I want to come." Something flashed in Yates's eyes, something that looked almost like relief. "Then we will go together." The hearing is scheduled for mid-April, which gives us time to prepare and make the journey. They traveled by train, a journey that took them across prairies and through mountains, from the wide open spaces of Nevada to the increasingly crowded eastern states. Violet had never been farther east than the Nevada territory, and the changing landscape fascinated and intimidated her in equal measure. Yates was a good traveling companion. He pointed out landmarks, told stories about the regions they passed through, and made sure she was comfortable at each stop. They maintained complete propriety, staying in separate hotel rooms and keeping their interactions professional, but Violet could not ignore the way her awareness of him had grown. She noticed things. The way he rubbed his jaw when he was thinking hard about something, the slight smile that played at his lips when he was pleased with a legal argument, the careful way he spoke to porters and waiters, treating everyone with the same respect regardless of their station. She noticed the way other women looked at him, and she felt an unfamiliar and unwelcome stab of jealousy. This was foolish. She was a widow, still in mourning, fighting for her dead husband's pension. She had no business developing feelings for her lawyer, no matter how kind or handsome or brilliant he might be. But feelings, she was discovering, did not much care about what was appropriate or sensible. Washington, D.C., was like nothing Violet had ever experienced. The city was massive, crowded, filled with impressive buildings and important people rushing about their important business. Yates secured them rooms at a modest but respectable hotel near the government district, and they spent 2 days before the hearing reviewing their arguments and preparing for every possible question or challenge. The hearing itself was held in a formal room in the Pension Bureau building, before a panel of 3 officials including General Henderson himself. Henderson was an imposing man in his 60s, with white hair and a military bearing that suggested he was not accustomed to being questioned or challenged. Violet sat in the public gallery and watched as Yates presented their case. He was magnificent. He laid out the facts clearly and methodically, cited law and regulation with perfect accuracy. And when Henderson tried to interrupt or dismiss his arguments, Yates pushed back with polite but unyielding firmness. "General Henderson," Yates said at one point, "you have stated that Mrs. Jameson has not proven sufficient need. Can you please define what would constitute sufficient need in your view?" Henderson's face reddened. "She is a young woman capable of work, capable of remarriage. The pension system is not designed to support every widow indefinitely simply because she finds herself inconvenienced by her husband's death." "Inconvenienced," Yates repeated, his voice dropping to something cold and sharp. "Captain Jameson served this country for 18 years. He was wounded multiple times in service. His death was a direct result of complications from those service-related injuries. His widow is not inconvenienced, General. She is struggling to survive on a ranch she cannot manage alone, struggling because her husband sacrificed his health and ultimately his life for this nation. And you have the audacity to suggest she should simply remarry or find work as if her husband's service meant nothing." "Mr. Sullivan," one of the other panel members interjected, "please maintain a respectful tone." "I apologize," Yates said, though his tone suggested he was not sorry at all. "But I must point out that the law is clear. Widows of military veterans are entitled to pensions when they can demonstrate need and dependency. Mrs. Jameson has demonstrated both beyond any reasonable doubt. The only reason she has been denied is because General Henderson has created an unofficial policy of denying women's claims, a policy that has no basis in federal law and that violates the spirit of our commitment to those who serve." The hearing lasted 4 hours. By the end, Henderson looked furious and Yates looked exhausted but satisfied. The panel announced they would deliberate and issue a decision within 30 days. That evening, Violet and Yates had dinner at the hotel restaurant. They were both too tired to maintain much conversation, but there was a comfortable silence between them, the silence of people who had fought a battle together and were waiting to see if they had won. "You were incredible today," Violet said finally. "The way you stood up to that general, the way you argued, Robert would have been proud." Yates looked up from his meal and something vulnerable flickered across his face. "I hope so. But more importantly, I hope I did you justice. You deserved better than what they put you through." "You did more than I could have ever asked for," Violet said softly. "No matter what they decide, you gave me a chance to fight. That means more than I can say." He reached across the table and took her hand, a gesture that was probably too familiar, too intimate for a lawyer and client, but Violet did not pull away. His hand was warm, slightly rough from old calluses he had earned before he became a lawyer, and the touch sent electricity racing up her arm. "Violet," he said, and it was the first time he had used her given name. "I need to tell you something, and I apologize if this is inappropriate given our professional relationship, but I cannot keep pretending." Her heart hammered against her ribs. "What is it?" "I have developed feelings for you. Real, genuine feelings that go far beyond professional concern. I think about you constantly. I find excuses to extend our meetings. I took on this case not just because it was right, but because it meant I could spend time with you, get to know you." He took a breath, his blue eyes searching hers. "I know the timing is terrible. I know you are still mourning your husband. I know I am probably ruining everything by saying this, but I could not go another day without being honest." Violet sat frozen, his hand still holding hers, his confession hanging in the air between them. She should have been shocked, should have pulled away, should have reminded him that she was in mourning, that this was inappropriate. But instead she felt a rush of relief so profound it nearly took her breath away. "Yates," she whispered, "I feel the same way." His expression shifted from anxious to amazed. "You do?" "I do," she confirmed, squeezing his hand. "I have been trying to deny it, trying to tell myself it was just gratitude or loneliness, but it is more than that. You make me feel alive again. You make me feel like myself, like someone who matters beyond being a widow or a claimant or a problem to be solved. You see me, really see me, and I have not felt that way in longer than I can remember." "Robert," Yates said carefully, "I do not want to dishonor his memory." "You are not," Violet assured him. "Robert was a good man, and I cared for him deeply. But ours was a marriage of companionship, not passion. He knew that, and he was content with it. He wanted me to be secure and safe. I think he would be glad that I found someone who makes me feel more than just secure." They sat there in the restaurant, holding hands across the table, and Violet felt the weight of months of grief and stress begin to lift. This was not forgetting Robert. This was not betraying his memory. This was allowing herself to live again, to feel again, to imagine a future that was not just about survival. They talked late into the night about everything and nothing. Yates told her about his family in Texas, about his mother who had encouraged his education despite his father's skepticism. Violet told him about growing up in a mining town, about losing her parents young, about the loneliness that had led her to accept Robert's proposal. They discovered shared tastes in literature, a mutual love of horses, and a similar sense of humor that had been suppressed by the seriousness of their professional relationship. When they finally parted to go to their separate rooms, Yates kissed her hand like a gentleman from another century, and Violet felt her heart soar. The 30 days they had to wait for the Bureau's decision felt eternal and impossibly brief at the same time. They returned to Carson City and tried to maintain their normal routines, but everything had changed. Yates helped Violet with repairs around the ranch, revealing that his ranch boy upbringing had not been entirely forgotten. They rode together across the sagebrush-dotted hills, talking and laughing, slowly building something real and solid between them. Violet was acutely aware that they were courting, though neither of them said the word aloud. It felt strange to be courted while still technically in mourning, but it also felt right in a way she could not quite articulate. This was different from what she had had with Robert. This was fire and excitement and deep, intellectual connection. This was the kind of love she had read about in novels, but never quite believed was real. One evening, as they sat on the porch of her ranch house watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of gold and crimson, Yates turned to her with a serious expression. "Whatever the Bureau decides," he said, "I want you to know that I am in this for the long term, not just as your lawyer, as the man who loves you." Violet's breath caught. "You love me." "I do," he said simply. "I know it has only been a few months, and I know the circumstances have been unusual, but yes. I love you, Violet Jameson. I love your strength and your determination and your kindness. I love the way you refused to give up even when the government tried to break you. I love who I am when I am with you." Tears filled her eyes, but they were good tears, happy tears. "I love you too," she whispered. "I did not think I would ever feel this way, but I do. I love you, Yates Sullivan." He kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promise. It was her first real kiss since Robert, and it felt like coming home and setting off on an adventure at the same time. The decision from the Pension Bureau arrived on a Wednesday in mid-May. Violet was at Yates's office when the telegram came, and they read it together, her hand gripping his arm so tightly she was probably leaving bruises. The Bureau had reversed its decision. Violet was entitled to Captain Robert Jameson's widow's pension, with full back pay dating to the month of his death. General Henderson had been overruled by the panel and was being investigated for his pattern of improper denials. Violet read the words 3 times before they sank in. She had won. They had won. Justice had been served. She turned to Yates and saw tears in his eyes, and then they were laughing and hugging, and he was lifting her off the ground and spinning her around in his small office while papers flew everywhere. "We did it," he said, setting her down but keeping his arms around her. "You got justice, Violet. You fought the law and you won." "We won," she corrected. "I could never have done this without you." He cupped her face in his hands, his expression serious despite the joy radiating from him. "You could have. You would have found a way because you are the strongest person I know, but I am grateful I got to be part of it. The pension changed everything." It was not a fortune, but it was steady, reliable income that meant Violet could keep the ranch, make necessary repairs, hire occasional help when needed. It meant security and stability, the things Robert had wanted for her. But more than the money, the victory meant something deeper. It meant that fighting back against injustice was possible. It meant that ordinary people could challenge powerful systems and win. It meant that women's rights and needs mattered, that a widow's struggle was worthy of recognition and support. News of the case spread. Other widows began to reach out to Yates, asking for help with their own denied pension claims. He took on several more cases, using Violet's victory as a precedent, and won most of them. General Henderson was eventually removed from his position at the Pension Bureau, and policies were reformed to prevent the kind of systematic bias he had perpetrated. Through all of this, Violet and Yates's relationship deepened and grew. They were careful to maintain propriety, aware that Violet was still officially in mourning and that small-town gossip could be vicious. But everyone who saw them together could sense the connection between them, the way they fit together like pieces of a puzzle finally clicking into place. In August, exactly 1 year after Robert's death, Yates proposed. They were at the ranch, riding back from checking on the cattle, when he suddenly stopped his horse and dismounted. Violet stopped too, confused, and he helped her down from her saddle with shaking hands. "I know this might be too soon," he said, his voice nervous in a way she had never heard before. "I know people will talk, and I know you might need more time. But Violet, I cannot imagine my life without you. I wake up every morning thinking about seeing you. I go to sleep every night grateful that you exist. You have made me better in every way a person can be better. So I am asking, even though it might be too early, even though it might be complicated, will you marry me?" He did not have a ring. He was just standing there in the Nevada desert, dust on his boots and hope in his eyes, offering her everything he had. Violet did not hesitate. "Yes, yes, I will marry you." His whoop of joy startled the horses, and then he was kissing her, and she was kissing him back, and the whole world felt bright and full of possibility. They married in September, a small ceremony in Carson City with a few close friends as witnesses. Violet wore a simple dress of pale blue, and Yates wore his best suit. The justice of the peace pronounced them husband and wife, and when Yates kissed her, Violet felt a completeness she had never known existed. They moved into the ranch house together, and Yates split his time between his law practice in town and helping Violet manage the property. He was good at it, his childhood on a Texas ranch serving him well. They worked side by side during the days and fell asleep in each other's arms at night, and Violet marveled at how much her life had transformed in barely more than a year. In the spring of 1880, Violet discovered she was pregnant. She had been feeling tired and slightly ill for weeks before she realized what it meant, and when she told Yates, his reaction was everything she could have hoped for. He picked her up carefully, as if she were made of glass, and held her close while whispering thank yous against her hair. "You are going to be a father," she said, laughing and crying at the same time. "I know," he said, his voice full of wonder. "I cannot believe it. A father, us parents." The pregnancy was relatively easy, and Violet continued to work around the ranch until she was too large and uncomfortable to ride. Yates became even more protective than usual, fretting over her constantly, until she had to remind him that women had been having babies since the beginning of time, and she was perfectly healthy. Their son was born in December, during the first snowfall of winter. It was a long labor, and there were moments when Yates looked more terrified than Violet felt, but eventually the midwife placed a squalling, red-faced baby boy in her arms, and everything else faded away. "He is perfect," Violet whispered, counting tiny fingers and toes. "He looks like you," Yates said, his voice thick with emotion. "He has your nose," Violet countered, smiling. They named him Robert Thomas Sullivan, honoring Violet's first husband and Yates's father. It felt right to Violet, a way of connecting past and future, acknowledging that Robert's memory was part of their family story. Baby Robert was a good child, curious and alert from the beginning. Yates was a devoted father, getting up for nighttime feedings, changing diapers without complaint, spending hours simply holding his son and marveling at him. Watching them together filled Violet with a happiness so profound it sometimes brought her to tears. The years that followed were full and rich. Yates's law practice thrived as his reputation grew. He became known throughout Nevada as a champion of the underdog, someone who would take on difficult cases that other lawyers avoided. He helped miners fight unfair labor practices, represented families cheated by unscrupulous land dealers, and continued to assist widows and veterans with pension claims. Violet expanded the ranch, using her pension and Yates's earnings to buy additional land and cattle. She hired a ranch hand, a young man named Thomas who had served in the army and was grateful for steady work. The ranch became profitable, a real working operation that provided income and stability. In 1882, their second child arrived, a daughter they named Clara Rose. She had Violet's dark hair and Yates's blue eyes, and she was fierce from the moment she was born, entering the world with a cry that suggested she had opinions about everything. Robert, now 2 years old, was fascinated by his baby sister, constantly wanting to help care for her. Life settled into a rhythm that felt almost miraculous in its normality. They were a family, secure and happy, building something lasting together. The ranch thrived. The children grew. Yates's practice continued to expand. Violet sometimes had to remind herself that this was real, that she was allowed to be this happy. She still thought about Robert Jameson sometimes, with fondness and gratitude. He had given her security when she needed it, had been kind to her, had left her with the means to survive even though the government had tried to deny it. She kept his photograph on a shelf in their bedroom, and sometimes she caught Yates looking at it with an expression of respect and perhaps gratitude of his own. "You ever feel strange about it?" Violet asked him once. "About me having been married before?" "No," Yates said honestly. "Robert was part of your life, part of what made you who you are. I am grateful to him for taking care of you, and I am grateful that you are strong enough to have survived losing him and fought for what was right. Your past does not make me love you less. It makes me love you more because I understand what you have overcome." In 1884, they received a letter from Washington. The Pension Bureau, under new leadership, was conducting a review of past cases to identify systemic problems. They wanted to use Violet's case as an example in a report to Congress about the need for pension reform. Would she be willing to share her story publicly? Violet and Yates discussed it at length. Going public meant opening up their lives to scrutiny, meant reliving painful memories. But it also meant potentially helping countless other widows and veterans who were still struggling to get the benefits they deserved. They agreed, and Violet's story was published in newspapers across the country. She was interviewed by journalists who were fascinated by the tale of a determined widow and the cowboy lawyer who had fought the federal government on her behalf. Some of the articles were sensational, exaggerating details, or romanticizing the story beyond recognition. But others were thoughtful and serious, using Violet's experience to highlight broader issues of gender inequality and government accountability. The publicity was overwhelming at times, but it led to real change. Congress passed pension reform legislation in 1885, making it easier for widows and other dependents to claim benefits, and adding oversight to prevent the kind of abuses General Henderson had committed. Violet received letters from women across the country thanking her for giving them hope and showing them that fighting back was possible. One letter in particular moved her to tears. It was from a widow in Ohio who had been denied her husband's pension 4 times. After reading about Violet's case, she had contacted a local lawyer and successfully appealed. She now had the pension that allowed her to keep her home and feed her children. "You saved my family," the letter said. "You gave me the courage to keep fighting." Violet showed the letter to Yates, and they held each other, both crying, both overwhelmed by the realization that their fight had mattered beyond just themselves. As the years continued to pass, the ranch prospered. Robert grew into a thoughtful, serious boy who loved books as much as horses. Clara was spirited and fearless, always climbing trees and getting into mischief. In 1887, they had a third child, another son they named James Nathaniel. He was the calmest of their children, content to watch the world with wide eyes and rarely crying. Violet sometimes stood on the porch of the ranch house, watching Yates play with their children in the yard, and felt amazed by the life they had built. She thought about that telegram in 1878, about the cold denial letters from the pension bureau, about the despair she had felt sitting alone in her kitchen. She had been so certain that her life was over, that she had no future beyond struggle and survival. She could never have imagined this. A husband she loved desperately, 3 healthy children, a thriving ranch, a life full of purpose and joy. She could never have imagined that her fight for justice would help so many others, that her story would contribute to changing an unfair system. In 1890, on a warm summer evening, Violet and Yates sat on their porch after putting the children to bed. Robert was 10 now, Clara 8, James 3. The ranch stretched out before them, bathed in the golden light of sunset, cattle grazing peacefully in the distance. "Do you remember that first day you came to my office?" Yates asked, taking her hand. "You were so determined, so fierce despite being exhausted and scared." "I remember thinking you were the most handsome man I had ever seen," Violet admitted with a smile. "And then feeling terribly guilty for thinking that while I was trying to get my dead husband's pension." Yates laughed. "I thought you were extraordinary. I wanted to take your case immediately, but I was trying to be professional and not let you know that I was already half in love with you." "Only half," Violet teased. "Maybe more than half," he conceded. "Definitely more than half. Probably all the way in love from the very first moment, if I am being completely honest." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sky change colors as the sun sank lower. "I got a letter today," Yates said eventually, "from the Nevada Bar Association. They want to give me some kind of award for my work on pension cases and labor law." "That is wonderful," Violet said, squeezing his hand. "You deserve it. You have helped so many people." "We helped so many people," he corrected. "Your courage started all of this. I just wrote the legal briefs." "You did much more than that," Violet said softly. "You believed in me when I could not believe in myself. You fought for me when I had no fight left. You gave me back my future." "No," Yates said, turning to look at her with those intense blue eyes that still made her heart race after all these years. "You gave me a future. Before you, I was just going through motions, taking cases to build a reputation. You showed me what really mattered. You made me want to be the kind of man who deserved you." "You already were that man," Violet said, tears pricking her eyes. "You just needed to see it." He kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of the deep love that had only grown stronger over the years. Inside the house, they heard James cry out from a bad dream and Clara's voice soothing him, playing the protective big sister. A moment later, Robert's voice joined in, probably reading his little brother a story to help him fall back asleep. "We should check on them," Violet said. "In a minute," Yates said, holding her close. "Let me just hold you for one more minute." So they sat there together, wrapped in each other's arms on the porch of the ranch they had built together in the life they had fought for and won. The desert stretched out around them, vast and beautiful under the darkening sky, and Violet felt a contentment so complete it was almost overwhelming. She had lost a husband and fought the federal government. She had been denied and dismissed, and told she did not matter. But she had refused to accept that verdict. She had found a man who believed in her, who fought alongside her, who loved her with a depth and passion she had never imagined possible. She had won her pension, yes, but more than that, she had won her life back. She had won justice and love and a future full of hope. She had shown other women that fighting back was possible, that systems could be challenged and changed, that individual courage could make a difference. The stars were beginning to emerge overhead, brilliant against the deep purple sky. Inside, the children settled back into sleep, safe and secure in the home their parents had built. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new work to be done on the ranch and in Yates's law practice. But tonight there was peace. "I love you," Violet whispered against Yates's shoulder. "I love you too," he replied, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "More than words can ever say." They sat together until full darkness fell, reluctant to break the spell of the perfect moment. Eventually, they went inside to check on their sleeping children. Robert sprawled across his bed with a book open on his chest. Clara curled up with her favorite doll. James sucking his thumb contentedly. Yates carefully removed the book from Robert's hands and pulled blankets over each child, and Violet watched him with a heart so full of love it ached. In their own bedroom, they undressed and climbed into bed, fitting together as naturally as breathing. Violet thought about the photograph of Robert Jameson on the shelf, about the journey that had brought her to this moment, about all the pain and struggle that had ultimately led to this perfect happiness. "Thank you," she said into the darkness. "For what?" Yates asked sleepily. "For everything. For fighting for me, for loving me, for building this life with me. Thank you," he replied. "For letting me, for choosing me, for being exactly who you are." They fell asleep in each other's arms, and Violet's last thought before sleep claimed her was that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. The years continued to unfold, each one bringing new joys and challenges. Robert grew up to study law like his father, eventually joining Yates's practice. Clara became a teacher, fierce in her advocacy for girls' education. James took over the ranch, managing it with skill and expanding it further. Each of the children married and had children of their own, filling the ranch house with noise and laughter during holiday gatherings. Violet and Yates grew old together, their hair turning gray, their faces gaining lines that spoke of years of laughter and love. They never stopped holding hands. They never stopped looking at each other with the same spark that had ignited in Yates's office all those years ago. They never stopped being grateful for the life they had fought for and won. In 1910, when Violet was 56 and Yates 58, they sat on their porch on a summer evening remarkably similar to that evening 20 years earlier. Their grandchildren were playing in the yard, shrieking with joy. Robert and his wife were visiting from town. Clara and her family had come from their home in Reno, and James lived in the foreman's house with his young family. "Did you ever imagine this?" Violet asked, watching a granddaughter chase a grandson around the yard. "When you took my case all those years ago, I imagined winning your pension," Yates said with a smile. "I imagined helping you get justice. I did not quite dare to imagine all of this." "I am glad it turned out the way it did," Violet said. "All of it. Even the hard parts, because they led us here." "So am I," Yates agreed. He looked at her, his blue eyes still bright despite the years. "You know what I think about sometimes? That general who denied your claim, who said women did not deserve pensions, who tried to break you. I wonder if he ever realized how wrong he was, how much damage he did." "I doubt it," Violet said. "Men like that rarely see their own faults, but it does not matter anymore. We won. We changed things. We built something beautiful." "We did," Yates said, pulling her close. "We absolutely did." As the sun set over the Nevada desert, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson and purple, Violet leaned against her husband's shoulder and felt the same contentment she had felt all those years ago. This was victory. This was justice. This was love. The fight had been hard, but it had been worth it. Every struggle, every setback, every moment of despair had led to this. A life full of love and family and purpose, a legacy of change that would outlive them both, a story of courage and determination that would inspire others long after they were gone. Violet Jameson had been told she did not matter, that her needs were not important, that her husband's sacrifice meant nothing. But she had refused to accept that verdict. With the help of a cowboy lawyer who became the love of her life, she had fought the law and won. And in winning, she had helped countless others win their own battles. As darkness fell and the stars emerged overhead, Violet and Yates went inside to join their family for dinner. The house was full of noise and laughter. 3 generations gathered around a table groaning with food, sharing stories and making memories. This was the life they had built. This was the victory they had won. And it was more beautiful than anything Violet could have imagined in those dark days after Robert's death, when the future had seemed impossible and hope had nearly died. But hope had survived. Love had prevailed. Justice had been served. And in the end, that was everything that mattered.